Hello, everyone. I hope you guys are having a good evening. As Yue said, my name is Francisca. I began as a volunteer back in 2000 and transitioned into an employee role around 2017 or so. Have been the Regional Information and Planning Manager for Los Angeles region since then. So I hope that the presentation today helps you out. I'm only briefly going to put my video on so that we don't have any lag in the presentation, but feel free to engage and drop your chat in the chat messages as we go if you have questions, and we'll address them as we go. Thanks, everyone. All right, so how to read an incident action plan in SitRep. Yue asked me to present a little bit about these two documents that are central to your experience in a disaster relief operation. And I thought what we would do is start with the big picture, which is that every time that we deploy into a new disaster environment, we encounter a unique experience. Those of you that have had many DRO experiences know that there is no two DROs that are the same. And so every single time there is new information, new pace of information, new sources of information, new types of information that start hitting our way in the initial and then ongoing parts of our response operation. And so one of the critical roles that information and planning plays is to provide a common operating picture. Common operating picture is a concept that's known in the incident command structure used by multiple emergency management agencies. It's something that you see taught in FEMA courses. It's a concept that has represented for many people the ability for us to try to stay coordinated with a common understanding of what is happening around us. So that's the common operating picture. So in order to try to meet the need, there are multiple tools that we use, some of which are these two reports, which we'll talk about today. So incident action plans, commonly referred to as IAPs, in fact, most commonly you'll see them in the acronym IAP, really is a document that is the outcome of an entire day's worth of decision making by the leadership in a disaster relief operation. It includes difficult resource decisions that had to be made through the course of that day. And also it includes a picture against the entirety of the operation. So every day-to-day decision also is weighed against what's going to be needed in the future, in the far future, in the near future, and the trends that we see in the operation. If you want to understand more about the process of how we do planning, when Yue shares a copy of this slide deck for you at the end of the presentation, you'll see there's a link to the DRO Planning Fundamentals, which is a course that is offered that breaks out the process of how this is done. So ultimately, the incident action plan is a mechanism to provide common operating picture around some key things that you need to know when you go on a deployment. What work should you be prioritizing? What resources are available to you? What is the safety information that you need to be aware of? And what available support and guidance is there in the disaster relief operation? Any one of these can fluctuate day to day depending on the environment. A couple of terms to know, concepts to understand about the incident action plan. The incident action plan functions around an operational period. So that is a start time and an end time, which this is the plan that is in place. So that's an important term you'll see often, operational period, referring to the particular day in which this applies. Each daily incident action plan moves us closer to longer range goals, as I mentioned before. It is set forth by a service delivery plan, sometimes advanced operational plans. It really is a mechanism for us to chip away towards the end goal of meeting client needs and being able to demobilize from the operation. The tool that Red Cross uses as an incident action plan has been slightly modified from the standard incident command structure template. So there's going to be a few forms I touch on that are unique to the Red Cross or have been implemented by the Red Cross that are not the typical that you see in other incident action plans. Lastly, the other thing to be aware of is the intent of this document is to serve many, many different people who require information. So it is full of information that can be referenced by a number of different stakeholders, and the different stakeholders will have different focuses, different pieces of information that they're needing to understand and see within the plan. So yes, it'll include first and foremost always our responders, you ensuring that you're going to receive the information you're going to need, but also steady state Red Crossers, those that are DPMs or DPXs that are not in the operation in local regions, those that are performing steady state duties like fundraisers that may not necessarily be tied to the operation, et cetera, et cetera. The division and national leaders, of course, use it as a mechanism to stay connected to what's going on in that incident, and our government and non-governmental partners. The one stakeholder that does not receive an incident action plan is our public. So this is not a public-facing document. There is contact information there about our own volunteers. Sometimes, a bit of information that needs to be slightly protected so that we're able to conduct our services. So those are things that we would not push forward publicly. So let's talk about what's in the incident action plan. And I'm still just showing the very front page of the incident action plan. These documents can be quite large, but you essentially have a menu of items in the front of the page. And those that are indicating as Ys say that, yes, this document is in fact included. Those that would say N mean the document is not included. The very first document you encounter in the incident action plan, this is a modification from standard ICS practice. It includes a 201, which typically is an initial incident briefing document, but has been adopted by the Red Cross to be sort of the operational wide overview of the incident and key actions. You're more likely to pay attention to this 201 document at the very start of an incident. When you're trying to get your bearings, trying to understand what's happened and what the nature of the situation is. The 202 is the following document. The 202 is known as the Incident Objectives Sheet. It includes priorities and objectives. It is probably one of the first things you should reference each morning when you receive the Incident Action Plan, because, as I mentioned before, this output is the result of a full day worth of difficult decision making, some of which may be changing the focus of each day. So depending on how dynamic the incident is, you may be seeing an objective focus that is different based on maybe we did not receive a certain number of resources we expected, or we have a new emergency that has emerged that has shifted our priorities. So the incident objectives is something to take a look at almost immediately when you start your shift. And if you're a supervisor, that you're using it to brief your teams. Essentially, when you have a list of objectives, you want to prioritize those higher to the top than those that are in the bottom. So the order matters. And what that means is if, it's a difficult day and there's only a few things you're going to be able to be accomplished, where are you going to direct your teams to go? What are the focuses that you want to ensure your team accomplishes that day? And that's the broad scope direction that we're providing within the 202 document. In terms of the 203, you're probably very familiar with the contact roster. It contains a wealth of different phone numbers and emails and contact information, names of key leaders in the incident. Those are all really important to know. So the 203 essentially is your big communications list, right? How do I reach everybody? All right, any questions so far on those?
I don't see any questions. There is a suggestion that since we have a lot of new people in here, that we don't use any acronyms, that we spell everything out. As in ICS will be Incident Command System. That's it.
I'll do my best. But as you can see, our document is full of acronyms. All right. So Incident Action Plan, commonly always referred to as an IAP, will also contain a few additional documents. So the 207 is a graphical representation. It's an org chart that shows the chain of command. And the chain of command is important because it directs not just approvals, responsibilities, accountabilities. It's important so you get an understanding of how big the incident is, how many layers, perhaps, decisions need to go through, and how well resourced you might be. So 207 is a helpful visual tool. The 207 usually mimics the contact roster. So generally, you have managers and above listed in the 203 and managers and above shown in the 207s. The incident map is something that is a standalone document in the Red Cross version of an incident action plan, although it's integrated in another document within the standard incident command structure. But this is basically a location that contains visuals, some images of maps, some links to the important maps that you may need to know. Generally, it's helpful for you to have access to a computer in order for those maps to really launch and be effectively utilized. The mobile iterations of some of our maps are really cumbersome, and sometimes they're just really frustrating to use. So that's a known issue, but those incident maps can really be real important for much of the field work. And then we do have the work assignments document, which is ICS 204, Incident Command Structure 204. So the 204 is considered the heart of the incident action plan. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking through the 204 in just a minute, but ultimately it is what the whole purpose of this incident action plan is built around what this document provides. Right, a few additional sheets that you'll find in this plan. There is a work sites sheet that is, again, not a standard incident command structure form. The work sites is a list of addresses to know, key addresses, important addresses, addresses you commonly reference. More often than not, it'll include things like warehouses and other sites that are not the shelter locations that are listed in the 204s. So there's numerous addresses. Sometimes it's a combination of all the addresses on the DRO, sometimes the key resources. So it really just does depend on the way your DRO has developed over time and what has been important to reference. So for that reason, if there is an address that you reference often and it's just cumbersome and you can't find it, it's not on the list, it's important for you to let information and planning know that it's a commonly referenced location. Otherwise, we kind of function based on what has been asked. The safety message is the form known as 208 from the incident command structure. You don't always have a 208 document. You generally have that when there is an expanded safety message that needs to be provided to the workforce. So if you see a 208 listed, take a look at it. If you're a supervisor, brief your teams on it. It means that there was enough safety information that warranted a much larger explanation, set of guidelines and resources that needed to be expanded into this 208 document. So that's one to note. And then we have the Incident Open Action Tracker. This is ICS 233 document. This one, if you notice, it says Open Mission Tracker. That is a modification Red Cross made, whereas the 233 and Incident Command Structure is known as an Open Action Tracker. What it does is it provides visibility of what else is coming in the horizon. It's not the plan for that operational period for today, but it will be the things coming in the third day or the fourth day or the fifth day and beyond that the leadership is beginning to track. We're seeing longer range activities that we need to keep in mind, something coming into the future, something we might have to begin planning for soon, but it's not going to be listed in your objectives for tomorrow or for today, right? It's not for that particular operational period, so it gets logged in this tracker. So if you're interested in getting a gauge on where we are in the operation, what else we have to do, where we're headed, the 233 provides you a glimpse about that. All right, and then a couple of final ones, of course, is the daily schedule, ICS 230. The 230 document is a schedule of calls primarily around that leadership coordination that I was describing at the very start. There's a full day of decision making that has to happen before one of these is published. And that set of coordination meetings is important to have our leadership on track for. So that's primarily the purpose of the schedule. On occasion, you'll see other meetings popping in there depending on where we are on the response and what additional coordination meetings are necessary. So that can fluctuate over time, but primarily it's those main leadership coordination meetings. And then finally, there are miscellaneous messages. Miscellaneous messages can look a variety of different ways, and it really varies DR to DR. It varies by disaster director. So it can look a number of different ways. In this situation, you're seeing something called a client information brief. And it can look like a variety of ways. Sometimes it'll be more along the lines of transportation messages, where to go pick up your vehicles or drop off your vehicles. It might be staffing messages, how to check in on the DRO, how to process the DRO. The miscellaneous messages that come in can look a variety of different ways. So watch out for those too. All right, so that gives you kind of a brief glimpse of sort of the menu of items that are available here. As I said, not everybody in the operation needs to daily look at every single piece of this incident action plan. We serve a variety of different stakeholders looking for different kinds of information. But for you as a mass care worker, as a responder, it'll be helpful to daily reference that objectives list, make sure that there hasn't been significant shifts in where you should prioritize your work. Take a look at your rosters and org charts. Is that still accurate? And you have the information you need to contact your support, and your work assignments, as we'll talk about in just a second. All right, so let's talk about the heart of the IAP. The work assignments documents are known as the 204. The work assignments documents are really the heart of the IAP because it is the work you do on the ground. It is the service delivery activity. It is the client-facing activity. It is the resources we have on the ground. So the work assignment should provide you with the who, what, where, when, why of the work you're doing assigned to which location. It is a brief glimpse of the multiple units that are on the ground, so it won't be exhaustive, and it will not outline every single resource that has been assigned, but it gives you an idea of the kind of workforce you'll have in that location, the kind of work you'll be doing, what are your main priorities for the day, when you should report. So here are a couple of examples in terms of individual disaster care, like health service, mental health and spiritual care, and then recovery services too at a physical location here, where some folks are going to support virtually and some folks in person. You have your main leader name and contact information, and then of course reporting time. The way that we get to this in the course of the day, as I said, is really driven by a much longer process. So you're seeing the end product. Ultimately, the purpose of the 204, the work assignment document, is to inform supervisors and their staff of specific tasks and assignments to be performed during the operational period. But it also assists the DRO leadership in assuring that the daily tasks are aligned to meet our overall priorities and objectives. If we have to reprioritize, if something difficult is happening, if we're short on supplies, if we're short on people, all of those things impact where we need to prioritize our limited resources. And so that's often the work that has to happen through the day. So at the start of the following morning, what you have is a bunch of leaders that, based on the feedback they've received from their teams, identify where the objectives should be for the next day. They then identify, how do I go about meeting that objective? That's the work of each of you as individual, subject matter experts to identify what strategy would be the best. And if you pick a strategy, what resources do you need to get through in order to meet the objective? And ultimately, that's how you end up with the who, what, where, when, and why in your 204 document. So as a fun example, I have here, there are multiple ways for you over here in the pink face to get over here to the yellow X. You could take the river, that would be one strategy. You could take the mountains, right? You need to climb. That would be another strategy. Or you could go past the desert, through the desert. That could be yet another strategy. All of these strategies could be valid depending on your situation. But each of the strategies require tactics, which is how you go about doing it. What are you going to need to do it and get it accomplished, and who you'll need. So in order to get to the tactics, you could, if you choose to take the river, take a boat. You could swim. You might identify, well, no, a canoe would be better. Maybe you snorkel your way through. There could be a number of different tactical ways for you to approach that take the river strategy. But ultimately, at the end of the day, folks make the decision based on their known experience and the known resources available of whatever's going to work best. That's what ends up in the 204. I also have linked for you in this document, once you receive it, the template for the incident action plan forms, so that you can read all about all of these amazing forms as much as you'd like. So again, ultimately, your work assignment document, the 204, captures the following decisions that were made. What needs to be done at each work location? Who do we need at each work location? What supplies and equipment are required? And probably most importantly, will those work assignments meet the needs to accomplish the objectives? And so these are not easy questions, right? When we have to allocate only a certain number of resources. Decision makers throughout the day are looking to see, where do you need the people the most? How do we allocate it out? How do we divvy that up? Where do you need the food? Where do you need your trucks? Where do you need your vehicles? Those are all decisions that need to be made through the course of that prior day, given what's known that's going to be arriving. And if you want to learn more about that process, I'm also linking a quick little workshop on that process. All right, so that's the Cliff Notes version of the incident action plan. Just going to briefly talk about the second document that you receive every day on a disaster relief operation, and that's called the situation report, commonly referred to as a SitRep for short. The SitRep is the outcome at the very end of an operational period, at the very end of the day. It is intended to reflect what you accomplished, whether you accomplished those objectives that were listed in that incident action plan, and how. So it does provide a form of common operating picture around what work was prioritized at the end of the day, what resources were deployed, and what are new priorities that are starting to come up. What are other potential obstacles that emerge that were not anticipated? This information is so important. If we had a plan that said we would prioritize certain work and other was prioritized, if some things were supposed to be deployed that weren't, and if other obstacles are emerging, this is helpful feedback for all the way up your chain to understand that we need to reassess the situation and find out where those obstacles are coming from. Great question, Jane. We'll tackle that one in just a second. So situation report. Ultimately, the situation report has become a kind of amalgamation of a couple of different things. It is not an incident command system document. It is sort of a hybrid between a 209 incident command structure document, which is their equivalent of a situation report, and a combination of what was a common practice in Red Cross to have the end of day reports from each of the units. So, which that was a historical practice. So now it's sort of a combination of both. What you see is you may have, in some situations, a quick status summary at the start of the top of the situation report, something with some maybe the DA information that's known, or just a brief about what the situation currently is. And then you'll have each of the units' operations and workforce and information planning and etc. Logistics, all of them listed here, with each of the units giving a quick update about in what ways the objectives are accomplished. In this case, recovery is indicating that they continue to contact clients for follow-up casework. They did identify and address recovery roadblocks, and they closed cases as recovery needs were met. You see disaster mental health, health service, and spiritual care, all indicating any requests they received were completed. So it's very clear based on this situation report that we're clearly in that recovery transition phase, and that's where the focus of the operation is. All right, so I had a couple questions that I want to bring up with a few suggestions, and then we can tackle any questions that we have in the chat. So the first one we receive a lot in information and planning is, I'm not getting an incident action plan. I'm not getting a SitRep. Why am I not getting these documents? So there's many reasons that that could be happening. One of them is you may need to ensure you or others that are indicating they're not receiving those reports have actually been assigned to the operation. So there is a process in place that allows us to mass distribute to everybody assigned to the operation, but if you haven't been assigned, then the system won't pick you up. So that's important for you to check to make sure that you have officially been assigned to the operation. You want to connect with your supervisor. Make sure that your supervisor is aware that you are in fact working under them as the supervisor, and that they can account for you and that it's reflected in the planning. The third thing is try checking the email that is listed in volunteer connection for you. Because if you are checking a different email that's not your primary volunteer connection email, then it might be directed elsewhere and you're not seeing it. And then, of course, you can always contact information and planning. There may be other reasons and numerous other reasons why you're not receiving the document that we might be able to troubleshoot for you. But sometimes it's really just a technical issue. And so I did list the IT service desk number here. So if it's not really about the way we're distributing, it's more around some technical issues, then the IT service desk would be a much better approach to try to get some support there. All right. And then the second question we receive a lot is, how come the incident action plan or the situation report is not accurate based on my understanding of the situation? There could be many reasons why there is a misalignment of understanding. The first, probably most principal reason is our ability to communicate up the chain of command. There is a reason that it's important that you're briefing with your supervisor every day. There's a reason that as a supervisor, you are ensuring you're connecting with your manager every day, that your manager is ensuring that they're connecting with their assistant director every day. That flow of information, first of all, ensures that you delegate other concerns or issues up to the appropriate people, so that it lifts the burden off of you. But it also ensures the information flow is happening both directions, so that everyone begins to be in alignment with the reality of the situation on the ground, so that when the assistant director, way at the top of the leadership chart, speaks on your behalf and advocates on your behalf during the planning process, then they are actually reflecting the reality of the situation. So it is everyone's responsibility to share information to maintain common operating picture, with all of us really making that effort. That may not be the only reason, or may not be the reason in certain situations of why there's lack of accuracy. It could also be a reflection of rotating workforce. Sometimes when we've had a significant shift in workforce, we've had a transition from the first round of deployment, so the first 14-day crew to the next 14-day crew, for instance, you begin to have the need of individuals to resettle themselves into the process, kind of connect to their new supervisor, their new manager, kind of gauge exactly what work they're doing and who they're reporting to. And sometimes information can get lost in that transition. So that's really helpful if you are briefing someone that's coming in for the first time, to really walk them through how you ensure information's flowing to their appropriate people. Information, of course, can expire, especially when we have a dynamic disaster situation, right? So if we have a developing fire, a growing fire, we've got wind event that's really has the potential to push the impact much larger very quickly in the coming days. Something that originally was accurate may quickly expire and no longer be accurate for a published end-of-day report. So sometimes that's the case. Of course, we do have sometimes a situation of inexperienced leaders, really that kind of add to the lack of information sharing. So that'll happen sometimes. Reassignments happen. So a team that used to belong under a particular shelter gets reassigned elsewhere, but somehow the reassignment doesn't get communicated. And so you'll start to see incident action plans that reflect that there's a team there, even though they are no longer there. So that's another kind of reflection of how that can lose accuracy. Of course, as any DCS leader, it's important for us, anyone committed to the mission, that we all do our part to advocate and be persistent about ensuring that a common operating picture is shared. It's important to be persistent sometimes. Sometimes it takes 3 or more times for someone to listen, especially in a chaotic environment or environment under high stress. So try to advocate, continue to be persistent, and that information will get shared. And we all strive to do this. We all hear the reminders in every disaster relief operation. Try to be kind, assume positive intent. Everybody up and down the chain is truly trying to do the best they can in advocacy for those clients. And sometimes we may have been working too many consecutive days without a break. Sometimes we haven't slept. Sometimes things are a little difficult and communication can get lost in the shuffle. So just continue to be persistent and advocate and be kind to each other. And we continue to do the best we can through this process. Okay, I think I'll leave it here. I saw amazing questions, so I definitely want to touch on those. Iwei, did you have a way that you wanted to touch on the questions?
No, actually, you can go ahead and start whichever one you want, since you're seeing the chat as well. Otherwise, I can read it to you.
Thank you. All right, so Jane's question was great. What can we do at the shelter or on the ground to make those reports easier for management to make decisions? Wonderful. So Jane, I love your question. I love your question because it reflects a genuine intent to try to support this effort to have the entire operation well informed so that we can make the best decisions as a whole. So there are lots of things you can do. In steady state, it's sometimes helpful to pre-draft some of your common reporting. In LA region, I have some of my folks actually draft some 215 documents or some example narratives for your situation report, so that you don't forget to share some of the key pieces you see early in the response or later in the response, some of the challenges that you've had in the past, to document those so you're able to kind of remember to nudge when that report needs to come up. So those are ways that you could do it, get some preparation in steady state. And then during response, it's that close communication and advocacy with your supervisor, whoever that may be, to make sure that they're understanding that these are important documents that impact the ground, even though sometimes they feel so far away. That daily decisions that are being made about everything from what resources we're actually going to provide to what funds are available to how long you're going to be able to keep your crews, all of that can get impacted based on the information coming back. So that's definitely helpful. Dave shares there has been a habit of adding various situation data, such as weather report and a map of the disaster area, which are redundant with the IAP, Incident Action Plan. Yes, that's true, Dave. That is something that has started to happen periodically. It really varies by the disaster relief operation director and by the division sometimes. What we can do in information and planning is to try to meet the need for information. And if it seems like the workforce is asking for it to be redundant, then that seems to be what we're doing. Deborah shares, give timely and accurate information. Thank you for that, Deborah. David says, I measured and all appear equal. Not quite sure. I might have missed the context there. Dave shares, as a fallback or outside of being assigned, there is a new, very nice tool for getting access to SitReps and incident action plans on DROs. It's new enough that it's not yet being updated all the time. Thank you, Dave. It also does require you to have a redcross.org account to view, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Shares, most people don't understand is it's controlled disaster. They do the best they can to package all information, but there is factors that make getting information out on time. Be kind and assume positive intent. Thank you, Al. We really are trying our best. Chris shares, does ARC use span of control? If so, can you explain? ARC being American Red Cross. Yes, we do use the term span of control. The way that Red Cross defines this, the appropriate span of control may be different than some of the incident command structure recommendations, which are more around 3 to 5 being span of control. Sometimes I see documentation in Red Cross that says 5 to 7 or even 7 to 10. So it really does vary. All right. Let's see. Chris says, if supervisor changes mid-operation period, how is that communicated? If that happens and we are aware of it, the 204 work assignment document, this guy, will actually show 2 leader names, one for the first half of the shift and the other for the second half of the shift. As long as it's being communicated to through the planning process, then we capture it. All right. Dave shares some recommendations of what to put in your situation report bullets. I do also have a little tip sheet on that. If anybody's interested on that one, I could share that with Eway too. And Jane says, do you have to have a Red Cross email to get this incident action plan? No, but you do need to be using the email that's your volunteer connection email, the one that is listed as your primary email in your profile in volunteer connection, in order to receive the incident action plan and the SitRep every day. Mercedes asks, could you cover factors, steps, time that it takes to publish the first IEP and subsequent reports? Great question. So the first incident action plan is the hardest incident action plan to draft because we are challenged with not enough information, quickly changing information often, and I'll share very honestly, a lot of resistance to providing information because things are still evolving. I would suggest, in order to support your information and planning folks for that first IAP or those initial ones, to try to share as much as you know, including the uncertainty. It's helpful for the planners to know how uncertain this may be so that there are contingencies and there's wiggle room and there's space to pivot and change, rather than try to force something that may change later, right? We'd rather it to be a useful tool, especially when things are chaotic. It's probably most important when it's most chaotic, but that's what I would recommend there. Let's see. All right, great. I think I got them all anyway.
Francisca, I do have a question. I actually have 2 questions. Number 1 question is, for someone is just brand new, this is their first deployment, and this is the first time ever that they receive the IAP, the Incident Action Plan. What sections do you suggest them to read first? The second question is, if they're a supervisor or a masker, a person in charge of an operation, they're relieving someone in an operation, which section of the reports do you recommend them to read first? If a person, let's say a person is masker lead or masker chief that is coming on, and they're relieving the operation, what do you suggest that they read first?
I think the answer to both of those questions are quite similar, because what you're trying to do is get oriented to the response, especially when things are really dynamic. So the briefing will give you the orientation of exactly what's happened here and where we're headed. The objectives will help you prioritize. And then I would say, if you're talking about top 3 work assignment, right? Where are your people? Where's your support? So that would be the third thing to focus on. For a new responder, what I would suggest is the briefing. I think that's good. but I also really strongly recommend to build a practice to have your briefings with your supervisor include a review together of these 3 documents in particular, the briefing, the objectives, and the work assignment. The others are things you reference throughout the day, frankly, like as the day goes on, you need to contact somebody, or you need to look at the map, or you need to look at a work site. But really, in order to get started, as you come on board, those 3 really are critical. See, Dave suggests briefing, objectives, safety, and client info. Thank you. Yeah, the safety message is another one for, that briefing piece with your supervisors. And the more you practice reviewing these key pieces with your teams on the ground, the less, intimidating this feels, right? So going back to that first image, it starts feeling like this.
And we have another question from Jane. Jane asks, does the disaster event have to be at a certain level to start the process of an IAP?
The required incident action plan is level 3 and above. Sometimes level 2 if it's not a multifamily fire. Although nothing prevents us from beginning the incident action planning process the moment that coordination is needed that is beyond the level of DAT. So when coordination is needed beyond the level of DAT. So that's sort of the big threshold we use in LA region. And we get our information and planning people practicing IAPs as soon as that's necessary, even if it's not reaching that required level, just to get the practice in and get everybody used to the process and working through that. Thank you, Iwe. It's hard to get out of that habit. I know, Alex. I was drafting some of those documents, Alex. We had 100 and something pages at one point, so we were very proud of getting it down to 90 pages. Yeah, the Hurricane Harvey DR was one that had, I think it ended up being 100 and some odd shelter locations alone. I can't even remember how many kitchen locations. That was an enormous collection of 204 documents. That was fun. It was, that's right, Dave. Yeah, that's where we started together. That was interesting. We weren't, I'm not kidding you, that the information planning team at the headquarters was up, started the shift at 7 a.m. and ended at 3 a.m. just in time to push out the IEP so we can get up in time for the 7 a.m. start again. That was a rough kind of set of weeks there, but we were getting those documents out to you as best we could.
Thank you, Francisca. And Chuck said 13 separate kitchen sites.
Thank you, Chuck.
I really loved Francisca's the first slide. The slide that's currently showing that you have a stack of paper. It is the reality of a disaster relief operation when you're level 6 and above that became a national DEER, that you have so many people. You might have 600, 700 people on the ground, that you do have a stack of paper that, it can be hundreds of paper long. I mean, I think the initial for Northern California, the initial one, it was already started with 30 some pages. And as we get along, we got more and more pages. So again, just remember, you don't have to read every single section of the report. You don't have to read this 100 pages report. You want to read the things that Francisca suggested, the sections that is important to you, the sections that you can find information, and also to know that where you can find the information. If you need to contact someone, you can look at the contact roster. If you want to know where a work assignment is, you can look at the work assignment sheet. So those are the ways that where you can actually look. Francisca, I actually don't see any other questions. Does anyone else has any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. I've actually finally figured out how to turn people's camera off. So we're not on camera, but if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, or come off mute. Chuck, you have a question. Your hand is up.
Actually, it's more of a comment, Yue. It's to all of us that when we are on the DR, it's important to have our reports done in a timely manner. As Francesca alluded to, that they sometimes didn't get the reports out and completed until 3 o'clock in the morning in Harvey. We're like for them not to have to spend the whole night up, spend 18 hours a day working on the IAP and things like that. So it's important that we get all of our documents and reports in on a timely manner to the IAP information and planning people. So anyway, just something to remember when you're out there.
Thank you, Chuck. I'll add one thing. The information we provide you is really only as good as the information we receive, right? So that's what Chuck really is alluding to. We're trying to do our best to provide you that common operating picture across the entirety of the operation and all the moving parts and all the complexities. And if the information flow isn't coming in, it really breaks that down and we're not able to serve you in the way we would like to. So we do appreciate effort to try to get us the information.
Thank you. I was about to say the same as well, that the information is only as good that, for the information planning team receive it. And sometimes don't hesitate to tell information and planning team that we currently do not have this information. I mean, it is okay to say, this is what we think. We currently do not have this information, but I think I can get you an information at this particular time or this, probably tomorrow. Because there's a difference between you're not giving the information versus you're telling people that I currently do not have information. So then people know what to expect is the proper, the